Welcome to Grimp Tap. I am your storyteller for tonight. Before we descend into the shadows of these 15 true accounts, I invite you to join our circle. Like this video and subscribe to the channel. It is the only way to ensure the darkness doesn't follow you home. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it? Are you truly alone, or is that just what you tell yourself? Tonight, we explore the vulnerability of the home. These 15 stories prove that a locked door is only as strong as the person behind it. Story 1. The Man Who Knew My Name. I was 10 years old the first time I learned that evil doesn't always look angry. Sometimes it looks patient. Sometimes it looks like a man standing on your porch, breathing fog into the cold night air, already knowing your father's name. That winter in western Pennsylvania was the kind that never seemed to fully end. Snow rotted into gray slush along the sidewalks. The wind pressed against our duplex like it was trying to push the walls inward. At night, the building groaned and popped as if it were alive and uncomfortable with the darkness settling into its bones. Our duplex sat in a long row of identical buildings, 2 families stacked per unit, all of them stitched together with thin drywall and shared fear. You could hear your neighbors cough, argue, cry, pray. Sometimes you could hear them dream. My father, Eric, was working construction out of state, chasing overtime hours so we could keep the lights on. My mother, Lisa, worked graveyard shifts at a warehouse 20 minutes away. Most nights, it was just us kids trying to hold the place together with microwaved dinners and cartoon reruns. There was me, my sister Hannah, 8 years old and braver than she should have been, my brother Michael, 6, who still believed monsters only lived in closets, and my baby sister Claire, 2, who didn't understand anything except hunger and sleep. That night, only Hannah and I were home. Michael and Claire were next door with Mrs. Reed, our elderly neighbor who babysat whenever Mom worked late. The clock on the wall read 9:30 p.m. when the knock came. Not loud, not desperate. It was slow, measured, certain. Knock, knock, knock. The sound moved through the apartment like a pulse. It didn't echo, it settled. Hannah looked at me from the couch. Her eyes were already wide. "Don't open it," she whispered. I crept to the door and lifted myself onto my toes to reach the peephole. That's when I saw him. He was tall. His shoulders filled the frame of the door. A red flannel shirt hung open beneath a heavy brown jacket. His jeans were stained at the knees, his boots scuffed and wet with slush. His face was lined, gray stubble crawling up his jaw like mold on concrete. But it was his eyes. They weren't angry. They weren't frantic. They were watchful, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Another knock. "Hello," he called. His voice was gravel dragged across metal. "Anybody home?" I cracked the door with the chain still latched. "Yes?" His eyes snapped directly at mine. "You must be Eric's kids." My heart stuttered. "How do you know my dad?" I asked. The man smiled, not with his mouth, but with the muscles around his eyes. "I'm a friend of your grandfather's, known your family a long time." He leaned closer to the crack in the door. "Your mom home?" "No," I said too fast. He nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer. "Well, I talked to her earlier. She said I could stop by." His breath steamed through the gap. "Mind if I come in and wait? It's cold." Every part of me screamed. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The man's eyes flicked down. "That her now?" he asked. I didn't answer. I shut the door, locked it, and answered in a whisper. "Jenna?" Her voice was shaking. "Don't open the door. My mom saw him outside your building. He's been walking around it for 20 minutes, looking in the windows. She already called the cops." My stomach fell through the floor. Hannah's face had gone pale. We didn't argue. We didn't pack anything. We ran to the bedroom, pushed the window open, and climbed into the snow. The cold bit through my socks. My lungs burned. The night swallowed our footsteps. We ran until Jenna's house appeared like a miracle. Police arrived. They searched. The man was gone. My mother came home an hour later, her face drained of color. But the real horror came 2 days after that. Mom went to the leasing office. She watched the security footage. At 4 a.m., the man returned. He didn't knock. He walked to every single window, pulled, pressed, tested. At one window, he stayed longer. His face flattened against the glass. His breath fogged it white. Then he smiled. Then he walked into the snow and disappeared. And I still don't know which window he was hoping we forgot to lock. For a long time after that night, sleep stopped feeling like something safe. It became something temporary, something you borrowed from the world and hoped would not be taken away before morning. Our apartment didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a structure someone else now understood better than we did. Mom replaced the locks the very next day. She bought new ones for the windows, too, metal sliders that made a sharp clack when they snapped into place. She installed motion lights on the back wall and kept every lamp burning after dark, even when the electric bill made her wince. But fear doesn't leave just because the doors are stronger. Fear moves in. I started hearing things. Not loud sounds, small ones. The scrape of branches against the siding sounded like fingers. The click of the heater turning on made my chest jump. Every car door outside felt like it was stopping for us. Hannah stopped sleeping in her bed. She dragged her blanket onto the floor beside mine and stayed there every night, her hand curled around my sleeve like an anchor. Sometimes she whispered, "Do you think he knows we moved rooms?" I told her no. I didn't believe myself. Weeks passed, then months. Life tried to stitch itself together again. Dad came home from his job in February. Snow melted into mud. The trees bled green again. People started opening windows. I thought maybe the story was over, until one evening in May. I was walking home from the corner store with Michael and Claire. The air was warm. Birds screamed in the trees. It felt normal, too normal. When we reached the front of our building, my heart sunk. A man was standing across the street. Red flannel, same jacket, same boots. Older now, thinner, watching. He didn't move when we stopped. He didn't smile. He lifted one hand slowly, not waving, just letting me know he had seen me. I grabbed my brother's hand and rushed inside. We didn't tell Mom. We didn't tell Dad. But from that day forward, I knew something important. Some doors don't close. Some stories don't end. Sometimes the worst thing isn't that someone wants to hurt you. It's that they know exactly where you live. Story 2. The Bicycle Shadow. The first thing you learn about Bergen, Norway, is that silence is never truly silent. Even on the quietest nights, the city breathes. Wind rolls down from the mountains like something alive. Trees whisper in languages older than houses. The sea exhales through narrow streets and slips beneath doors. And in that sound, the constant, endless sound of existence, something else can hide. I was 10 years old the night I learned that some things follow you. My parents believed in safety the way people believed in weather. They thought it was natural, predictable, something you didn't need to question. We lived in a clean, orderly apartment complex just outside the city center.
The kind of place with trimmed hedges, neat gravel paths, bested leaned carefully against walls. Neighbors nodded politely. Doors were locked, but not because of fear, because that's what people did. The world felt arranged, balanced, controlled. That Friday, my parents took my little brothers to IKEA. I remember my mother standing in the doorway, keys in hand, reminding me not to open the door for anyone and not to leave the stove on. My father joked about meatballs and flat-packed furniture. They left at 6:30 p.m., promising to be back before it got too dark. It was already getting dark. In Norway, darkness doesn't ask permission. It arrives early, sliding across the sky like a lid being closed on the day. The apartment felt enormous when they were gone, too quiet. The refrigerator hummed, pipes ticked. I lay on the couch watching.
The following days blurred together. I stayed with friends. I avoided home. When I returned with my father, the bicycle was gone, but the feeling never left. A month later, I woke at 3:12 a.m. to the sound of metal scraping concrete outside my window. I didn't look. I already knew. The next morning, the bike was leaning against the building again. This time, someone had tied a red ribbon around the handle, and inside my mailbox was a folded piece of paper with only 4 words written in careful block letters. I found you again. I stopped pretending after the note. I showed my parents everything: the ribbon, the bicycle, the paper. My mother's face drained of color. My father's jaw tightened in a way I had never seen before. They called the police. Officers came. They photographed the bicycle, the note, the mailbox, the surrounding area. They told us they would keep an eye out. They told us it was probably a prank. They told us not to worry. That night, my father sat in the living room with a baseball bat until morning. 2 days later, the bicycle disappeared. 3 nights after that, the phone rang at 2:41 a.m. When my mother answered, no one spoke, but in the background, faint and metallic, she heard the sound of a chain. She hung up shaking. The next week, a red ribbon was tied to the tree outside my bedroom window. Then another appeared on the mailbox again. Then another on the handle of our garage door. We removed them. They returned. The police found nothing. No fingerprints, no witnesses, no camera footage. The man was patient. The man was careful. And the man knew my name. One afternoon, walking home from school, I found another note taped to my locker at the bus stop. This one said, "You still run fast." My legs nearly collapsed. I changed schools 2 weeks later. We moved to the other side of the city that summer. Different building, different locks, different life. For a while, the world breathed again. Until the fog came, and through it, on the street outside our new apartment, I saw a red shape glide past, a bicycle. I wish I could tell you the move saved us. It didn't. It only taught me how far a shadow is willing to follow. The new neighborhood was quieter, farther from the city center, pressed between water and woods. We tried to start over. New routines, new stores, new streets. My parents forced themselves into optimism. I forced myself into silence. For months, nothing happened. No ribbons, no bicycle, no notes. I almost believed the man had finally lost me, until one night in December. Snow had fallen for hours, soft and endless, covering the world in white. I was returning from a friend's house when I saw the tracks, bicycle tracks. They cut across the fresh snow from the road to our building. My stomach dropped. I followed them with my eyes. They ended at our door. The snow there was disturbed, as if someone had stood for a long time. I didn't go inside. I walked to the neighbor's house and called my father. When we returned together, the tracks were gone. But inside our mailbox, resting on top of the letters, was a strip of red fabric, and beneath it, another note. Snow makes it harder for you to hide. That night, my father installed cameras. They never recorded him, but sometimes in the early morning hours, I would wake with the feeling that someone had just been standing beside my bed, breathing, listening, waiting. I stopped sleeping. I stopped dreaming, because I understood then something that no child should ever have to understand. This was not coincidence. This was not a stranger. This was someone who had chosen me. And once you are chosen, distance means nothing at all. The cameras never caught him, not once. They recorded cats. They recorded snowstorms. They recorded my father taking out the trash at dawn and my mother returning from work exhausted and pale. But the one thing we were looking for, the red jacket, the crooked posture, the bicycle that whispered instead of rolled, never appeared. And yet the signs continued. A ribbon on the fence, a scrap of paper slipped beneath the door, a rock placed carefully on the windowsill. Small things, quiet things, messages written in the language of someone who did not need to be seen to be present. One night I found the bicycle tire marks again, this time in the mud near the woods behind our building. They circled the property once, twice, 3 times, like the outline of a question no one dared answer. I was 18 when I finally confronted my father. He's still here, I told him. He didn't argue. He didn't dismiss me. He only looked tired. We moved the following spring. Another town, another set of locks, another attempt at forgetting. For a while, it worked. I went to university. I left Norway for a while. The world opened. Life happened. Years passed. I started to believe that maybe the story had finally ended. Until one evening, in a city far from home, walking alone through fog, I heard the chain, soft, familiar, behind me. I didn't turn. I already knew. And that's the truth people never tell you. Some fears don't chase you. They wait. They wait until you're grown, until you believe you're safe, until your guard lowers just enough for the memory to breathe again. I never saw his face that night, but I didn't have to, because the shadow of the bicycle stretched across the pavement at my feet, and for a moment it was 10 years ago, and I was running through the forest again, knowing with absolute certainty that some things in this world do not want to harm you. They want to keep you.
And written in the frost on the glass with a fingertip were 4 words: no codes needed anymore. The snow beneath the porch was smooth, untouched, but on the siding beside the door I saw them, fresh scrape marks, where something sharp had tested the wood. I did not sleep that night, or the next, because once someone proves they can find you anywhere, the world becomes a single, enormous hiding place that no longer works. After the message appeared on the glass, I stopped feeling like we had moved. It felt like the house had followed us. The next morning, my mom tried to stay calm. She scrubbed the words away with vinegar and hot water. She told me it was probably some stupid kid. She told me the scrape marks were from a raccoon, but she didn't meet my eyes when she said it. That afternoon, I skipped school and stayed home alone. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't play music. I sat in the living room with the bat across my knees and watched the windows. At 3:17 p.m., the doorbell rang. One press, then two more. Slow, patient. I didn't move. Through the peephole, I saw a man standing perfectly still on the porch. He wore the same gray hoodie from Ohio, same narrow jaw, same crooked nose. Time collapsed. My chest went hollow. He leaned forward and spoke directly into the camera. "Your lock is old now. You should update it." Then he smiled. Not wide, not angry, relieved. I didn't answer. I didn't breathe. I stood there until his face vanished from the lens. When I finally checked again, the porch was empty, but a small object lay on the welcome mat. I waited 10 minutes, then 20, then I opened the door just wide enough to grab it. It was a key. Our new key. The exact same cut, same scratches on the head, same red rubber grip my mom used. He had been inside. I called my mom. She dropped the phone when I told her. We called the police again. They came, they looked, they wrote, they promised patrols, but nothing can patrol the inside of your thoughts. That night, I locked my bedroom door and wedged the chair under the handle. At 2:41 a.m., something pressed against the outside wall of my room. Slow, careful, testing. I stayed awake until sunrise, because I understood something then. The lock wasn't the problem. I was the target. By the 8th day after the porch visit, I stopped pretending this was coincidence. Every evening between 2:30 and 3 a.m., something happened. A footstep on gravel, a faint scrape on the siding, the low mechanical click of a lock being tested. Not every night, just often enough to remind me that I was not alone in my fear. My mother stopped sleeping in her room. She brought a blanket and slept on the couch with a kitchen knife in her hand. Neither of us said anything about it. The house no longer felt like shelter. It felt like a box someone else knew how to open. On the 9th night, I made a mistake. I fell asleep. I awoke to the sound of my bedroom doorknob turning. Not violently, not rushed, patient, curious. The chair I had wedged under the handle shifted slightly. The pressure stopped. Silence returned. Then came the whisper, through the wood, soft enough that it could have been part of my dream. Still awake. My blood froze. I pressed my mouth into the pillow to keep from screaming. I heard his breath on the other side of the door. Long, slow. Then his footsteps retreated down the hall. I waited an hour before moving. When I finally opened a door, the front door of the house was wide open. No forced entry, no damage, just open. On the wall beside the door, written in black marker, were 5 words. "You should change your code again." We moved the next week, across state lines, different house, different locks, different town. But sometimes at night, when I'm drifting off, I still hear it, the smart lock beeping, and in my mind I see his smile, because the worst part is not knowing where he is. The worst part is knowing he knows exactly where I am. Story 4. The 20 Laps. I was 13 the year I learned the difference between fictional fear and the kind that leaves fingerprints on your memory. Up until that night, fear had been a game. I spent hours in the dark of my bedroom in Dayton, Ohio, clutching a controller, guiding pixelated characters through blood-soaked hallways and abandoned mansions. Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Outlast. I devoured them all. I loved the thrill, the chase, the music that made your heart crawl into your throat. I loved believing I understood terror. But real fear doesn't come with background music. It doesn't warn you, and it doesn't end when you turn off the console. That night, the house was quiet in the way that only deep midnight could be quiet. My mom was working a late shift at the hospital. My dad was still out on a delivery route. My older brother Mark had fallen asleep with headphones on. The only sound in the house was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of old floorboards settling. I had finally turned off the game and crawled under my blanket, the blue glow of the TV fading into black. The room smelled faintly of warm plastic and the cherry soda I had spilled earlier. I was drifting off when I heard it. Not a bang, not a crash, a long, slow, wounded sound. The sliding glass door. It didn't slam open, it screamed open. The metal track shrieked as if something was being dragged across its throat. I froze. My brain told me it was the wind. The rational part of me whispered, "It's nothing. It's just old. It sticks sometimes." But the fear in my chest had already begun to bloom. Then I heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, not rushing, not sneaking, walking as if the house belonged to him. I pulled the blanket over my head and squeezed my eyes shut, my heart hammering so violently I was afraid he would hear it from across the house. The footsteps crossed the living room, past the couch, past the TV, then past my bedroom door. I hadn't closed it. A thin strip of hallway light sliced across my carpet, cutting through the darkness beneath my doorframe. The shadow passed, toward the bathroom. The bathroom door opened. The light clicked. The toilet lid lifted. The sound of water running. Then silence. Footsteps again. Back past my room. Into Mark's room. His door creaked. Paused. Closed. Then the footsteps returned. Back to the living room. Back to the kitchen. Back toward the hallway. And again. And again. And again. I counted. I don't know why. Maybe because my mind needed something solid to hold on to while everything else dissolved. By the 5th pass, my hands were numb. By the 10th, my stomach felt hollow. By the 15th, I was convinced my heart would tear itself apart inside my chest. He wasn't searching. He wasn't stealing. He was pacing, walking the same path. Living room, bathroom, Mark's room, back again, over and over and over. By the 20th lap, I was no longer breathing properly. Then, suddenly, the footsteps stopped. The house fell silent, so quiet I could hear my blood in my ears. And written in the frost on the glass with a fingertip were 4 words: "No codes needed anymore." The snow beneath the porch was smooth, untouched, but on the siding beside the door I saw them, fresh scrape marks, where something sharp had tested the wood. I did not sleep that night, or the next, or the next, because once someone proves they can find you anywhere, the world becomes a single, enormous hiding place that no longer works. After the message appeared on the glass, I stopped feeling like we had moved. It felt like the house had followed us. The next morning, my mom tried to stay calm. She scrubbed the words away with vinegar and hot water. She told me it was probably some stupid kid. She told me the scrape marks were from a raccoon, but she didn't meet my eyes when she said it. That afternoon, I skipped school and stayed home alone. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't play music. I sat in the living room with the bat across my knees and watched the windows. At 3:17 p.m., the doorbell rang. One press, then two more. Slow.
It felt like we were abandoning something alive. We drove to my aunt's place across town. Nobody slept. My mother stared out the window. Mark curled into himself on the couch. I stayed on the floor, watching the door. At dawn, my father called the landlord, told him everything. The landlord laughed, not cruelly, uncomfortably. "Son," he said, "that unit's been empty for years before you. Every family leaves in under 6 months. You're the longest anyone stayed." My father asked why. There was a long pause. Then the landlord said, "They all say the same thing." "What thing?" "That something walks their hallway." My father didn't say anything after that. He simply hung up. We moved out 2 days later, but the story didn't end when we left. 3 weeks later, Mark woke up screaming at our new place. He said the man had followed us, not inside, not into the house. He said the man was standing across the street, counting the windows. My brother refused to sleep after that night. Every sound outside made him flinch. Every car passing, every footstep on the sidewalk, every gust of wind against the window. He kept the blinds closed and the lights on. He insisted on sleeping on the couch so he could see the front door. 3 nights later, he woke me at 2:11 a.m. "Don't move," he whispered. His face was gray. His eyes weren't blinking. "Do you hear it?" I held my breath. At first, nothing. Then, a sound so soft it almost blended into the silence. A footstep, outside, on the sidewalk. Then another, slow, measured, deliberate. I crawled to the edge of the couch and pulled the curtain back an inch. Across the street, beneath the dead street lamp, stood a man. Same height, same shape, same posture. He wasn't looking at our house. He was looking at me. He lifted his hand, not a wave, not a threat, just lifted it and pressed his palm flat against the air, the way he had pressed his face against our windows. Then he turned and walked away. We never saw him again. Years later, I returned to that old duplex. It had been boarded up, windows shattered. The landlord was gone, the building scheduled for demolition. Before I left, I stepped into the overgrown backyard. There were footprints in the dirt, 20 of them, lined up in a perfect oval, walking nowhere. Story 5. The Unfinished Basement. When I was 24, I moved into my first apartment completely alone. Not a roommate, not a friend crashing on the couch, not even a neighbor whose footsteps I recognized, just me. The building was old, the kind of place with flaking brick, warped wooden stairs, and windows that rattled whenever a bus passed 2 streets away. My unit was the only basement apartment, the door at the end of a narrow concrete hallway, beneath a set of stairs that always smelled faintly of mildew and rust. I took it because it was cheap, and because after a breakup, cheap felt like survival. The landlord called it unfinished basement charm. In reality, it was one long cement rectangle divided by thin plywood walls. No insulation, no ceiling tiles, just exposed beams, pipes that groaned at night, and one small window at ground level that let in a sickly gray light during the day. At night, the place became something else entirely. You could hear the building breathe. Every shift of weight in the foundation echoed. Every wind gust turned the vents into whistling throats. Sometimes water would drip from somewhere deep inside the walls, slow and patient, like a clock counting down. But none of that bothered me. I liked the quiet, until the night I heard the chain. It was just past 1:30 a.m. I was lying in bed scrolling through my phone, the room lit only by the bluish glow of the screen. The heater had shut off, the pipes were settling, everything was still. Then, skrrk! A long metallic drag, slow, heavy, deliberate. It came from directly above my ceiling. I froze. Another sound followed, clink, 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 like a chain being pulled across bare concrete.
The unit above me was supposed to be empty. It had been empty for months. I had personally watched the landlord change the locks. I had seen the "For Rent" sign hanging in the dusty front window. No lights had ever been on, no footsteps, no voices. Yet something was moving up there. The chain dragged again, louder this time. My heart began to hammer so hard I could feel it in my throat. I slid out of bed and stood there in the darkness, listening. Skrrk, clink, clink. It moved from one side of the ceiling to the other, then stopped. Silence poured back into the room, thick and heavy. I waited. 10 seconds? 30? A minute. Nothing. Maybe it was pipes. Maybe it was the building settling. Maybe it was a raccoon. I told myself that. I almost believed it. Then I heard footsteps, not above me, but on the basement stairs. Slow steps, careful, measured. Someone was walking down towards my door. My breath locked in my chest. I stood perfectly still, staring at the dark outline of my bedroom door. The footsteps stopped outside. Then the chain sound again, right on the other side of my wall. I didn't think. I grabbed my flashlight and the only thing I could reach, a metal dumbbell from under my bed, and opened the door. The hallway was empty. No footsteps, no shadows, no sound. The chain had stopped. I followed the hallway to the stairwell. The door at the top of the stairs, the one that led to the vacant unit above, was open, wide open. I hadn't touched it. No one else should have been able to. The smell hit me first. Cold concrete, rust, something else beneath it, something old and damp. I climbed the stairs slowly, my flashlight beam trembling in my hand. The upstairs apartment was completely dark. No furniture, no boxes, no signs of anyone living there. Except a chair. One single wooden chair, placed in the exact center of the empty room, facing the doorway, facing me. And sitting on that chair, a photograph, a Polaroid, still developing. I stepped closer, my heart thundering in my ears. The image came into focus slowly. My bedroom, my bed, me asleep, taken from the corner of my own room, an hour ago. I don't remember dropping the photograph. I remember looking at it. I remember my knees going weak. I remember the strange weightless feeling in my head, like gravity had loosened its grip on me. And then the photograph was on the floor. The flashlight beam trembled across the image. My bedroom, my bed, my body under the thin blanket, my face turned slightly toward the wall. The timestamp printed along the bottom edge confirmed what my brain already knew. 1:02 a.m. It was 1:43 a.m. now, which meant whoever took it had been standing inside my apartment while I slept. I backed away from the chair. Every instinct screamed to run, but my body felt disconnected, as if I were moving through thick water. I stepped into the hallway, then down the stairs, my hand sliding along the cold concrete wall for balance. The door to my apartment was still closed, still locked. Nothing inside looked disturbed. The bed was exactly the way I had left it. The only proof that any of it had happened lay crumpled on the upstairs floor. I closed the basement door and turned the deadbolt. Then I added the chain. Then I dragged my dresser in front of the door, and I sat on the floor with my back against the wall, clutching the dumbbell until the sky outside my window began to lighten. I didn't sleep. Morning came slowly, gray and colorless. Sunlight leaked through the narrow basement window and fell across the concrete like a thin, sickly ribbon. Everything looked normal again, which somehow made it worse. I climbed the stairs just after 9 a.m. The upstairs unit was locked. The chair was gone. The photograph was gone. The room was empty. The landlord swore he hadn't been there. No one had a key except him. No one had applied for the unit in weeks. That night, I tried to convince myself it had been stress, lack of sleep, a hallucination triggered by fear. Then, at 12:17 a.m., my phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number, a single image attachment. When I opened it, my blood turned to ice. It was a new photograph.
Me, standing at the sink, brushing my teeth, taken from the hallway behind me. Timestamp, 12:05 a.m. The message beneath the photo read, "You lock the door after I leave." I didn't stay in that apartment much longer, but sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I still hear the chain, and I wonder where he is now, and how many unfinished basements he's living in. Story 6, The Attic Whisper. We had lived in that house for almost 3 years before the whisper started. The scratching had always been there, light, distant, easy to ignore, the kind of sound you explain away without even thinking about it. Squirrels, mice, maybe a raccoon. Old houses have voices of their own, and after a while you stop listening. That's what my mother used to say. But the scratching was different at night. During the day it sounded random, almost playful, a scuttle here, a thump there. At night it slowed down, became deliberate, measured, as if whatever lived above us had learned when we were trying to sleep. The house sat at the edge of a dying neighborhood outside Bloomington.
Story 9. The Second Shadow. I found the mirror at a thrift shop on Maple Street, wedged between a cracked wardrobe and a box of old porcelain dolls that all seemed to be missing their eyes. It was taller than me, framed in dark wood carved with patterns that felt wrong, not evil, not cursed, just unfamiliar, like a language my mind didn't know how to read anymore. The woman behind the counter hesitated when I asked about it. "That one's been here a long time," she said. "How long?" I asked. She shrugged. "Before me." That should have been my warning. I carried it home myself, sweating under its weight, the glass strangely warm despite the winter air. The moment I set it against my bedroom wall, the room felt tighter, smaller, as if the space had lost something it needed in order to breathe. That night I decided to take a picture with it, just a selfie, just to show my friend the creepy vintage mirror I'd bought. I stood in front of it, phone raised, curtain half drawn behind me. The overhead light flickered once, then steadied. I smiled. The camera clicked. When I looked at the photo, my stomach dropped. I was there, exactly as I should be, but behind me, near the curtain, was a second shadow. It wasn't attached to anything. It didn't match the lighting. It didn't have a body. It was only a shape, long, thin, reaching. Its fingers were inches from my neck. I spun around. The room was empty. The curtain didn't move. The air was still. No sound, no presence. I turned back to the mirror. My reflection was no longer smiling. I hadn't changed my expression, but my reflection had. It was staring past me, at something behind my shoulder. That was the first night. After that, the shadow began appearing in every reflective surface, the bathroom mirror, the microwave door, my phone screen when it went dark, always behind me, always closer. On the third night, I woke up to the sound of breathing, not in the room, in the mirror. When I approached it, the glass was cold, so cold it burned my skin, and my reflection did not move when I did. The shadow's fingers pressed against the inside of the glass, and my reflection whispered, "It's learning your shape." I moved out the next day. The mirror stayed behind. 3 weeks later, my landlord called. He asked if I'd left something in the apartment. He sent me a photo. It was the mirror, standing in the center of the empty bedroom, and in the reflection, the shadow was smiling, wearing my face. Story 10. The Garage Guest. I didn't notice it at first. The first night the garage door opened at exactly 3 a.m., I assumed it was a glitch. The second night, I blamed the cold. By the third night, I started keeping track. 3 a.m. every night, no exception. The sound would pull me out of sleep, the low mechanical hum, the chain rattling, the door lifting, letting the winter air pour into the house. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, waiting for the door to close again. It never did. I would get out of bed, go downstairs, and find the garage wide open, empty, nothing disturbed, no footprints, no sign of entry. I checked the keypad, changed the remote batteries, had the opener inspected. Nothing wrong. So I installed a camera, motion activated, IR, pointed directly at the garage interior. The next morning I reviewed the footage. At 2:59:48 a.m., the garage was empty. At 3:02, the camera triggered. The crawl space door in the back wall of the garage, a narrow panel I had never opened, slowly slid outward. A hand emerged, then an arm, then a man's head. He pulled himself out of the crawl space like he'd been living inside the walls. He stood up fully in the camera frame, pale, shirtless, so thin his ribs pressed against his skin. He turned and faced my car, and then he leaned forward, pressed his face against the windshield, and began to lick it, slow, methodical, from one side to the other, for 20 minutes. The timestamp never lied. At 3:20 a.m., he stopped, stared straight into the camera, smiled, then crawled back into the crawl space and pulled the panel closed from the inside. I sold the house. The new owner called me 2 months later. He asked me if I'd ever noticed the garage door opening at night. Story 11. The Crawl Space Cradle. The first thing I noticed was the missing socks. It sounds stupid now, but that's always how it starts. Something so small your brain refuses to treat it like a warning. One pair at a time, then another, then half my drawer. I assumed the dryer was eating them. Everyone does. Then my nail clippers went missing. I searched the bathroom, the kitchen, my backpack, my car. Gone. I bought another pair. 3 days later, that one vanished too. The house I was renting was old, post-war construction, narrow crawl space beneath the floor, the kind of place that groaned when the temperature dropped and whispered when the wind pressed against it just right. I lived alone. At night, I sometimes heard movement under the floor, light taps, soft scrapes, the sound of something shifting its weight. Rats, I told myself, or squirrels. Then I stepped on a loose board in the hallway. The wood gave way just enough for me to see the darkness beneath. A smell rose up. Not rot, not mold, something warm, something lived in. I pried the board up, and there it was, a small bed made from my missing clothes, socks folded into a pillow, t-shirts layered into a blanket, my old hoodie rolled into a mattress. Around it, arranged with disturbing care, were my fingernail clippings, hundreds of them, all placed tip to tip in the shape of a heart. In the center of the heart sat my missing nail clippers and a note written on the back of one of my mail envelopes. I keep what you leave behind. I moved out the same night, but sometimes I wake up missing things, and I check under the bed, and I listen to the floor, and I wonder where my heart is being kept now. Story 14. The Dog's Warning. It started with my dog refusing to come into the living room. That alone should have told me everything. Rex was a German shepherd, fearless, loyal, the kind of dog that barked at thunder and chased delivery trucks like they had personally insulted him. But that evening, he stopped at the doorway, hackles raised, low growl vibrating deep in his chest. I laughed. "Relax, man, it's just the chair." The armchair sat by the window.
The same place it had been for years. Faded brown fabric, one broken spring that made it lean slightly to the right. Nothing special. Rex didn't laugh. His eyes never left it. The growl deepened. His lips curled back just enough for me to see the edges of his teeth. His paws slid on the hardwood as he backed away from the room. That was the first time I felt the shift in the air. Not cold, not hot, just heavy, like the room had gained weight. I snapped my fingers. "Come on, Rex." He shook his head, not in the way dogs normally do, not playful, not excited. It was slow, refusing. Then the chair moved. Not much, just enough. The cushion compressed, the fabric dipped, the broken spring let out a quiet, familiar creak, as if someone had just sat down. My mouth dried. Rex exploded into barking, not warning barks, panic barks. He bolted down the hallway, nails skidding on wood, crashing into the bedroom door and clawing at it like he had to escape something that wasn't supposed to exist. I stood frozen. The armchair continued to sink, slowly, deliberately. An invisible shape pressed into the cushions. The fabric wrinkled around nothing. The armrests bowed inward, like heavy elbows resting on them. Then the chair turned slightly, facing me. The television flicked on. Static filled the screen. I backed toward the kitchen, my heart slamming so hard I could feel it in my ears. "Hello?" I whispered. The air above the chair warped, like heat rising from pavement. A pressure filled the room, the unmistakable feeling of being observed by something that did not blink. Rex